I'm just trying to get this thing to set up so I can record it. Just all right. All right, here we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope we're all doing well, staying safe, and welcome back to those who have participated before in my Zoom sessions that I have had in the past. For those who haven't met me, I'm pretty sure most people have. My name is James Jackson III, founder and executive director of the Utah Black Chamber of Commerce. Also the Supply Diversity Program Manager for Zions Bank Corporation, as well as a bunch of other things that I enjoy doing in the community. And then for some reason, I'm looking on Facebook, I'm trying to make sure it just says a black screen. So I'm trying to be sure it's actually showing something here. I've never gone live before on my own Zoom, so I'm just making sure it works okay. There we go. All right. So to kind of give you a background for those who haven't participated before on what I have been doing since the death of George Floyd, honestly, I got a little frustrated about the conversations that were happening on social media. And, you know, the whole back and forth was driving me insane. I'm not a back and forth type individual. I like to be in a meaningful dialogue that can actually create change. So basically what I wanted to do is like, you know what, maybe just come to a Zoom call and let's have some dialogue here. Let's kind of share some perspectives. And what spurred from that is that people continued wanting more, to a point where I had 8 police chiefs on one call at one time, and have a lot of meaningful continued dialogue with police chiefs since then. And it has continually expanded towards elected officials, other organizations, other initiatives that the Chamber as well as our foundation has been doing. So it's been very productive conversations, so much that it went for about 6 weeks. And then it got to a point where we were so busy, we had so much going on that I wasn't doing a good job at promoting the calls very well. So I had to put them on pause and started diving in, but people were still wanting more. So I thought, all right, I'll start doing them maybe not once a week, but maybe I'll do them bi-weekly or monthly. And so that's what I began to, so that's what this call is all about. And what I wanted to really start off with on today's call is kind of lead with, I guess you can call it my mantra that I've been sharing over this last 6 weeks, which is listening to understand instead of listening to respond. And what I'm going to share within this session today is some very simple leadership principles. And then I'll get into more specific topics a little bit later. But I figured I'd lay out the foundation on where this really stemmed from, as I do a lot of consulting and training for small businesses on communication, leadership development, and diversity and inclusion. This is a lot of what I share with these particular companies that I speak with. And honestly, where we're at now as a nation, we simply just suck at communicating, frankly, and we need to get better at that. So this is my goal today, is to kind of share how we can be better in our communication. And everything rises and falls on leadership. So how leadership communicates transcends through the rest of our community. And so if leadership doesn't change, well, then there has to be a change in leadership, simply put. And I get more into that in a little bit later. So let me just kind of share kind of a visual of what it means to listen to understand instead of listening to respond, and why I got frustrated on social media about all this back and forth nonsense that really is really not going anywhere. Say, for example, that you are on one side, you're on one island, and other people are and the other perspective is on a different island, and you're separated by a body of water. And this body and this land can't, these two lands can come together if a bridge came down. Right now, the bridge is drawn up. So we have these walls. So each of us are pushing our agenda, our perspective, shouting at each other, but all it's doing is hitting these walls because we're not worried about your agenda. We're worried about our agenda, trying to push our agenda towards you. So there's this back and forth. All we're doing is responding. We are not understanding. And until we start understanding, these walls are going to stay up. And so our goal is, when we listen to understand, is that we're going to bring the bridge down. And when the bridge comes down, we're going to have some common ground. And on this common ground was where we can actually have some meaningful dialogue and find actual solutions. And it won't be just your vision, it won't be my vision, it'll be a new vision to really how the US can progress and grow further and make this nation a better and welcoming place for everyone. And we were just not there, unfortunately, and it's getting worse. Honestly, we're in almost a civil war right now with this back and forth within the community. And it's becoming very exhausting for both sides, more so within the Black and diverse communities, just because we've been trying to get people to listen for so long, and we continually to find roadblocks to get people to understand us. And I'll get in a little bit more of that going further. To kind of share with you an example of what I mean by this, there was a company that I was consulting with. They actually reached out to me, and they have a PR nightmare that they're experiencing at the moment. They had an employee leave due to racial discrimination. And this particular employee had a pretty decent social media following, had a good influence. So it's causing this PR nightmare of this former employee just bashing on this company. And the people, the employees that caused the racial discrimination are no longer at that company either. And so the HR director is in a difficult position to where she wasn't able to communicate to these employees because they're no longer there to find out what the problem was. But now she's dealing with this PR nightmare as this former employee is just going at it and sharing how she'll never teach. It's not up to her to teach her company about how to be welcoming and inclusive for her, and how this company has done this and how this company's done that. So what the HR director shared with me is that she reached out to this employee. She called her up, and all she had was to listen, because she had no background on anything besides what this employee said, because the other employees weren't there. So all she had was listen, and that's all she did. And as challenging and as hard as it was for her to listen, she gained so much. Not only the perspective on what they can do better as to have an employee like that employee stay and help that employee grow, but what happened, the more she listened, the more the wall started coming down. And when the wall finally came down and they finally had some common ground, they started sharing a meaningful dialogue, to where the point where that former employee began to open up and kind of share, you know, if I was still there, here's what I would do. Here's my suggestion. And so so that's just an example of what it means to establish a common ground. And that's how important it is to listen. That's how, because when you listen, you actually understand. And when you understand, you actually develop some empathy and gain in some meaningful dialogue. And this is a simple leadership principle. Listening is the most important part of communication. Not speaking, listening. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? We have all heard that. And right now, we're doing a lot of talking instead of listening. And through the sessions that I've had with with police departments and corporations, um, and with government, the ones that are most productive is the ones where they were actually listening. And then I listened in return. And from that, we were able to decide, we found some common ground, like, oh, here's what we can do here, here's what we can do there. For example, with the police department, and trying to understand the whole defund aspect. And the defunding thing was not something initially that I was a fan of. Like, why defund an organization that protects and serves our community? But as I began to understand defunding a little bit more, because I was listening, I was like, oh, well, if they just termed it something differently, it'd be a lot better. And then from the police department side, it's like, that's what we've been trying to say this whole time, is that we are overutilized and under-resourced. And if we just start reallocating funds, start reallocating resources, then the police departments can do what they're really set out to do, which is to protect and serve. Instead, they're handling, homeless issues, they're handling mental health issues, they're handling social work issues, they're handling everything, because 911 is always the go-to. And so it's important when we have a meaningful dialogue that we can actually find some insight and actually find solutions. So what I want to do within this session is kind of dive a little bit deeper into where you're listening to understand instead of listening to respond. And it comes from, like I mentioned before, basic leadership principle within communication. So I'm a certified coach with the John Maxwell team. So I'm going to talk a lot about some John Maxwell principles, and then I'll dive into more of where I've used these principles within my leadership within the chamber, and kind of share with you how you can use these principles going further within your own platform. Because believe it or not, whether you're a senior executive or owner, middle manager, or at entry level, we all have leadership, because leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. Your influence is basically determined by the value you're able to deliver to those that follow you. And the greater your value, the greater your influence, which means the greater your leadership. So there's many components to how you can build your influence. John Maxwell calls it the 21 indispensable qualities of a leader. And I'll just name just a quick few. There's character, there's competence, there's communication, which is the most important within leadership. There's problem solving, there's discernment. And so if you just think about those and think about people that influence you, people that you follow, and think about their level of problem solving skills, their level of communication, their level of competence and character. Now, they don't have to have all of them, but if you just kind of take all 21 of these abilities and rank them on a scale of 1 to 10, and you divide it by 21, then that gives you what I call like your leadership lid, which means it gives you a number to where if you're, for example, a 5 or a 6, well, then you have level of influence of people that are like a 5 or below. If you have a 7, then you have influence of people that are a 7 or below. So you kind of take all that into consideration, and that's your level of your leadership. That's a level of your platform that you can use your voice, use your influence to bring change. So we all have an ability to influence people. And so I don't want you to get misconstrued that, well, I'm not a leader because I'm in this position. Yes, you are a leader. Leadership is not determined by position or title. It's all determined by your influence. And influence goes to your value that you're able to deliver. And the most important element that you can deliver in value is when you're actually validate someone, right? When they actually feel validated, when they actually feel that you are listening to them, that you actually understand what they're going through. When you don't value their experiences or their perspectives, then you essentially are doing the opposite, which is invalidating them, which means that you've lost their trust, you've lost their support, You've lost your influence with them. And you see this going on nationally right now, where there's people in position of leadership that are invalidating people's concerns, their needs, their voice, to a point where now they don't trust that leader, they don't want to support that leader, and most of the time they fear that leadership because they don't feel valued. And this is very, very important when it comes to leadership ability, is that you have to value people. And the way that you value people is when you're listening to their needs and you understand their needs to a point to where you can actually bring the bridge down and find some common ground to have some meaningful dialogue. Now, not everybody on one side or the other are bad. 98% of the nation wants what's good for this country. We have all the best intentions, but our influence is determined by who's influencing us. And who's influencing us is what builds our perspectives. So understand, like when you have someone that's sitting on the other side of the perspective than you do, they are, in most cases, they're not ill-intended. They're looking after their perspective, they're looking after their needs, they're looking at their values. And so it's up to you to understand those needs, understand those values. And then once you understand it more, then I guarantee you, once you start understanding where they're leading more, then you'll start finding some common ground. Is that going to happen all the time? No. I mean, it takes a lot of leadership development when you're dealing with some challenging people, right? The more challenging the people you're trying to communicate with, yeah, the more challenging it is to start establishing some common ground here. So how do you listen to understand, right? Because one thing is just to listen, and listening these days is tough because we live in the era of distraction. We're distracted all over the place. Some of you are probably looking at social media right now, commenting or looking through other news to maybe ask a question through the Zoom, or there's TV on in the background, or there's kids running around. We've all experienced this during this quarantine time, to where we have unlimited amount of distractions all around us to stay focused. As someone that's a coach, here's where I really learned the endurance that's required to listening. Because as a coach, that's the main goal, is to listen to your client for 2 hours straight. And all you're doing is simply asking questions. And so in order to ask the solid questions, you have to focus. You have to listen. And so someone like me who's naturally an introvert, I'll coach someone through a 2-hour session, and I literally need about an hour to recharge, because it's a lot of work to listen, especially in this era of distraction. We have all these devices all around us. You know, we're quick to squirrel, you know, just because it's so easy for us to get distracted this time. Someone mentioned to me, like, we have the attention span of a goldfish at this moment. So I get it. Listening can be hard sometimes, but so one key is to listen as intently as possible. Be intentional in your listening. Second, when you don't understand something, when you don't agree with something, you don't respond back with your agenda or your perspective. You have to start asking questions. That's the key. So one is listening, 2, ask questions. When you don't understand or don't agree, continue to ask questions, because the goal is to find common ground. The goal is to bring the wall down. But the more questions you ask and the better you're listening, then the more valued that person feels. And so there's a way to ask questions, though. And so I'm going to kind of give you some insight. I'm giving you some coaching here. You know, I usually charge for this one. I'll give it to you for free at this moment. So there's ways to ask questions in order to get some better insight. If you ask a question that leads with why, you're going to create a defense mechanism with that other person. So don't lead with why. When you lead why, you're going to lead to a defensive answer. So what you want to lead with the question is to allow them to think more. And so you want to lead with a how, or you want to lead with a what, or you want to lead with a where or when, right? But lead with a how or what instead of a why, right? Those, because when you lead with a how or what, that leads to more thinking. Don't say, why did you do that? You ask, how do you believe that will bring impact, right? So that way it digs deeper and gets them thinking more about their response. Because why question easily leads to an easy response, because it's a response with defending themselves. It's really easy. But if you lead with a how or a what type of question, then it gets more deep thought. And don't ask closed-ended questions, because when you ask a closed-ended question, then that means the dialogue pretty much stops, and you're actually forced to continually ask questions, because the goal is just to try to build a dialogue. And so don't ask closed-ended questions. Ask open-ended questions, but lead with a how or a what or a when or where. Those are key, right? When I first started the Utah Black Chamber, I was blessed with ignorance, because I had no idea how to run a chamber of commerce. I had no experience in running a business. I had no experience in community or building a nonprofit organization. And why I say that was a blessing, because I leaned on mentors. I leaned on others who've built nonprofits, who've built chambers of commerce. And I continually ask questions on, how do I do this? What does it mean when I do that? And from that, that helped me build in my leadership abilities to build the structure that we have today. So, and it worked a lot on me, learning how to communicate with leadership. So I had to elevate my own influence, reading books, doing some research, being building up myself better to where I can bring my leadership lid from like a 5 on to a 7 or 8 or a 9. So I could communicate with government, so I could communicate with business executives, so I could communicate with other nonprofit CEOs. And now that we have this structure, and I say I was blessed to find leadership to create this structure just in time, because as soon as June 1st hit, we went from a startup to an enterprise in about 2 months. That's how one of my leaders within the chamber called it. It's like, that's what it felt like. We went from just moving along, building and learning to now we had to bring more in. It's time to bring more impact than we ever had within a 2-month period. When we had the structure in place to bring on 40 members within a 2-month time frame, where we had so many different ideas and resources and programs brought to us. And I'm thankful that I had the leadership ability enough, that I've built the structure enough that we can respond in a way to exponentially grow that impact, where we have several different programs, to where our foundation didn't skip a beat during COVID time, where we were put things in place that people were attracted to what we're doing. We had causes in place that people can contribute to when they're looking to donate their money, looking to help more. We had a structure in place. And that stemmed from me listening to understand and not listening to respond. And it was helpful that I didn't know enough to know better, right? Because sometimes we kind of lead with our own mindset, with our own knowledge, with our own internet resources, right? That we try to push upon people. But when we come with a clean mind of understanding, coming at a level where we're just humble enough just to listen, and as uncomfortable as it may be sometimes, hearing what the other side is saying, you gain so much more insight on what their thoughts are. There was a great TED Talk that I was just reminded of, and I think, Mark, you shared this TED Talk by Theo Wilson, where he actually went undercover. Black dude went undercover on social media as an alt-right person. He created a whole new profile and everything, and he dove right in just to kind of gain a little bit more perspective. And he said, you know what? These people on that other side are not all racist. They're great people. You wouldn't know them on the street. They just have a different mindset, different influence, which creates that different perspective that they don't intentionally mean to offend my perspective or, you know, challenge everything I do. This is just what they know. And from that, he created these barbershop meetings, right, that held on Facebook Live and had meaningful dialogue. And those actually grew into multiple cities throughout the nation. And so it's those conversations that actually bring impact, because who knows? I mean, there's someone like me who eventually has a platform that can now talk to police departments, that can now talk to CEOs. And you yourself, you know, you have an idea or you shared an idea with somebody and started listening more and more and gained an understanding. You're like, you know what? Maybe we can do it this way. So the key to any solution is to listen. So I want you to do me a favor. If you just close your eyes for a minute and kind of think about what the world looks like when we're all past this, when the pandemic is over, when, you know, when we come to a time where there's racial equity in the world. What does that look like to you? Now, I don't want you to think about who's in office or who current leadership is. What I want you to think about is your community. I want you to think about your values in your community and what impact is being made, where everybody is acting the way or living the way that you want them to live. So think about that for just a moment. And as you think about that, this is how we start working backwards, to where we're not looking to challenge ideas or perspectives. We're looking for solutions. Because guess what? As you start working backwards from what that vision you have, it might not be the perspective that you were influenced by. It may not be by that idea that you were given from people that you've been listening to. It may be something totally different than what you ever thought. And so when you paint that picture of what racial equity looks like, of what this pandemic looks like when it's all over, that's where we need to begin and start finding these solutions. Like I mentioned earlier, when we start putting on this common ground, it's not your vision, it's not my vision, it's this new vision that we need to start looking for. So to wrap up, now it's time for you to listen. There's two topics I kind of want to share real quick that I think are important, that's really drawn a divide right now. That's making things challenging for people. And there's a lot more, but I'm only gonna have time for two because I do want to open up for, you know, at least 10 to 15 questions here at, not 10 to 15 questions, 10 to 15 minutes for some questions. Some people are so consumed in their agenda and by their influence that they're paying too much attention to the actions and not the message or the purpose. And we see that happening right now in sports. I am such a huge Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I'm actually really turned off by the NFL at the moment, by how they're responding to social justice and how they're treating their players. Because if you think about it, 75% of the NFL is Black. 90% of the ownership, or even more than that, is white. I think 26 out of the 30 teams have white head coaches. The GMs, all white. Now, when you think about head coaches and GMs, most of them are former players. And so when they go to look for a new head coach or a new GM, you see that there's a problem there. They even try to instill the Rooney Rule, to where they want to have, they're required to interview at least one person of a diverse background for a head coaching position. You see how well that's worked. 75% of the NFL is Black, but yet we still have the majority of the leadership is white. And so, and they're led by a different perspective than what the players have, to where the players feel invalidated. They feel that they are just being forced to play as if their life depends on it, because it kind of does in this pandemic. And people are saying, well, they get paid millions of dollars to play this game. Yes, but they're still people. And another thing, do you know why they're paid millions of dollars just to play football? Not because they have amazing talent. I'm not downgrading their talent. It's not because of their talent. They're being paid based on their influence. They use that talent, they use that skill to build their influence. And when you build your influence, guess what? You have a platform. And so these teams pay these players a bunch of money because of their platform. They bring in revenue, and you bring in revenue because you reach an audience that wants to watch them play. And so when you try to silence their voice, you invalidate their message. And that's why I get frustrated about this kneeling controversy going on right now. And say, oh, they just need to be paid to play. You know, they're paid just to play ball. That's not the case. They're paid because of their platform. You can't compare an NBA player who gets paid $30 million a year to a business executive who gets paid six figures. Their platform is different. There's no comparison there. They're paid because of the value that they bring to the world. And so when you silence their voice, you silence their message, you silence them, and they feel invalidated. And so that's why they play. They play because of their influence. They play because of their platform and what they bring to the table. Yes, they love the game. The game gives them the foundation to be that voice. And when you want to talk about disrespecting the flag, well, then think about everything else that people do to disrespect the flag. If you look at the US flag code, one of those things that you're not supposed to do is wear the flag as apparel. Yet we do it all the time. But when it comes to an action of protest, that's when the light is shined on them, which is terrible. And when I mentioned earlier how we're trying to use all these mechanisms just for people to listen, we get shunned left and right. Martin Luther King said, riots are the language of the unheard. And when you continue to silence people's message in any type of platform where they try to use their First Amendment right, then negative things begin to happen. So don't pay so much attention to the action, but understand the message, understand the purpose that's behind of why the NBA is writing messaging on the back of their jerseys. Why are they kneeling? Because we are in a hard, challenging time in the US, and we just need people to listen. We need people to listen, to understand, so we can start and begin to find solutions to the problems that are happening in the world today. So want to let people know that, because I'm a huge sports fan, but I find myself paying attention more to the NBA right now than I am the NFL, because at least in the NBA, the players have the freedom to use their platform, to use their message, to use their voice, whereas the NFL, there's too much back and forth, there's too much politicizing going on, which is very, very unfortunate. It's going to be interesting to see what the season is going to look like come fall, if there is one. They're determined to make it happen, but players have a different view on that. Another thing that I want to discuss real briefly is Black Lives Matter. And and what people need to understand, there's two different things, two different elements of Black Lives Matter. There's a movement and there's a global organization. And unfortunately, the global organization has really politicized the movement, which makes it challenging for the movement. And I'm not going to get into too much of the details of how it's politicized. You just have to look that up, because we can start digging a rabbit hole there. What I do want to share, though, when there is any type of message that can have the potential to be twisted or turned, that other perspective is going to take that and run with it. And so as much as we try to share the movement, and I've witnessed this too when I try to share like the Black Lives Matter discussions that I've been having over the last several weeks, someone keeps chiming in on my LinkedIn about want to hear more about the Black Lives Matter organization. I'm like, okay, I'm talking about the movement, not the organization. Pay attention, because the movement is what's causing awareness, is what we want to bring to light. We want people to listen. And so when you have this type of division, it's really hard for people to gain an understanding. And so what I encourage people to do is like continue to listen and don't fall too much into the trap of trying to defend the Black Lives Matter organization. Because if you don't understand the organization enough, it's going to be challenging. But if you really want to engage in Black Lives Matter, the movement, that stay in that lane. For example, there's 2 different Black Lives Matter happening in Utah right now. Black Lives Matter Utah is a movement. Then there's Black Lives Matter Salt Lake, which is the actual global organization that's being developed here. And so all I encourage you to do is look at what impact is being brought to the table, the conversations that are being happening right here locally here in Utah. I know there are some people that are listening nationwide, but it's important to understand that the movement itself, the awareness, is what's bringing the impact. So what I want to conclude with is a message of trying to bring us together somehow, because that's what we want to do, is bring together. I remember when I began my fall semester as a senior in college, and I worked full time, going to school full time. I was a busy guy, and I was on my way to work, and without any notification, people were actually getting out of the car, going to the door, and then turn around and get back in their car. I'm like, oh God, I'm being let go. Like, this is it. Like, no notice, no anything. What's going on? And so people are saying, James, you gotta go home because of this and this happening. And so I walked over to the door, and what it read was, due to national circumstances, we are closing our office today. And this is me working for Discover Financial Services at the time as a collector. So I went home, turned on the TV, and watching the towers in trouble. In New York, the World Trade Tower was on fire. And I was glued to the TV for most of the day, just like in awe of what's happening. And I'll never forget that on the steps of the Capitol, most of the congressmen and women came on the steps, and together they sang, God Bless America. And from that point, I felt we're gonna be okay, because we have this united front, this leadership that's gonna help us get through this. They're gonna find solutions, they're gonna find the people that did this, and we're gonna be all right. And we were. It took a couple years, but we were okay. I can't imagine that happening now. I don't see for a while congressmen and congresswomen coming to the steps of the Capitol to sing God Bless America. There's too much division happening. And like I mentioned earlier, everything rises and falls on leadership. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you're on, Republican or Democrat. If we don't find a way to come together united by listening and not pushing the agenda, but actually finding solutions, listening to understand instead of listening to respond, we will never be united. And as what's been written before on the song, united we stand, divided we fall. And we're falling fast. And we can't unite when leadership is consistently dividing us. So if you can't change in your leadership, you have to change leadership. And that's what I want to close with today. So I hope something that I shared with today resonates with you. I appreciate you chiming in. And at this time, we have about 15 minutes left here for some questions. I try to pay attention to the chat on the side. And like I said, I get distracted way too easy. So at this time, I'll just, if you guys have something you want to share or a question you want to ask, now's the time. it's a little more silent than normal. I'm a little scared.
You know, James, I'll chime in quickly. First, you know, you mentioned the TED Talk, and I shared that in the chat with Theo Wilson, which I just watched the other day, and it was so powerful. I mean, one, definitely take some time to check out this TED Talk, because not only is it valuable with the content he shares, but the guy's hysterical, and so it's really an amusing talk. But I mean, just to know that this is a guy that was able to embrace people that obviously had completely conflicting views as his own, that most would want to just like fight back at, and he was looking at them and going, that's, you know, the filter that they live in.
All right.
And like, who am I to say they're wrong? Like, for me personally, my wife and I talk about this all the time. I don't know how many of you remember a few years ago the like phenomenon, the white and gold dress and the blue and black dress, and some saw it white and gold and some saw it blue and black. Well, when I see it, it's white and gold, and my wife sees blue and black. And we always talk about, she's not wrong for seeing blue and black, and I'm not right for seeing white and gold. It's just the way I see it. It's just the way she sees it. And so, you know, whether it's global warming or the president, or, I mean, it's like really trying to get like, yeah, I have my opinion of how I think people should be or the world should be. Doesn't mean I'm right. It just means it's the way I see it. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to be on today's call, to really learn from James, who I just got connected to a couple of months ago, which I'm grateful for, and I'm looking forward to having lunch with him on Monday. Is, you know, I grew up in New York, and so my filter, like my best friend in high school was black. Like, it wasn't a white and black thing. I mean, it was just, he was my friend. That was just how it was. But just the other day, I'm in a marketing class. I live up in Davis County, and there's a awesome black business owner up there. And I even feel weird saying black business owner, because to me, he's just a business owner. But his name is James. He owns James Gourmet Pies. He makes the most incredible sweet potato pies, unbelievable pies.
I've had them before. Yeah, they're amazing.
Oh my gosh, they're amazing. And he only uses like 6 ounces of sugar, or yeah, it's like, anyway, it's, you got to try these pies out. But another friend of mine who's in Salt Lake, whose wife is Asian, recently is getting into a restaurant kind of business, and she got involved, and I don't have the name of the nonprofit, but it helps minorities. And I was really questioning if I should even approach this with James, because like or with this other James, because it's like in my head, I don't see him as a minority, but I guess he is. and it's weird. And again, I'm trying to like embrace what I don't know. Like, there's like, we all have in life the things we know, the things we know we don't know, and then there's a whole world that we don't know, that we don't even know. And so I'm wanting to be part of this community with James Jackson here, because I have my own filter, and I want to like just get it in the world of other people that don't see the world the way I see it, or the world the way I want to see it, like James. Like, I really want a world exactly the way James is talking about. Like, how can we, yeah, you see it your way, you see it your way, fine, let's just let's create some harmony still.
Exactly.
So that's all I wanted to share.
No, I appreciate that. I mean, it is important to have different perspectives. I mean, that different perspectives is what helps us grow. If we all thought the same, we would never grow. We would never have new ideas. And that's why diversity is so important. And one thing I want to share real quick, Mark, is that we are trying to get away from the term minority, because as we start growing, we're becoming less and less of a minority, right? Even here in Utah. And so we're starting to encourage people to use the terms ethnic, diverse, BIPOC, you know, with this Black, Indigenous, people of color, you know, because, you know, instead of maybe using minority, maybe use shift population, because we are shifting towards a whole new population to where we're becoming more and more diverse as a nation, to a point where we won't have minorities pretty soon. Everybody's going to be a minority. So now we really want to specifically look at ethnic, people of color, LGBTQ, you know, just kind of really go and identify people in that way. Because as we start growing, that term is going to become less and less relevant.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think it's important to be inclusive, because I grew up also on the East Coast. Actually, Mark grew up right near where my husband grew up, right, Mark? And as a Jewish person who we now say presents as white, I mean, there's a lot going on in our community as well.
Yeah.
And a lot of us are also working very hard to be allies to the BIPOC community and Black Lives Matter, the movement. But at the same time, it's having come from a place where a lot of people were Jewish to representing a population is also something that's really difficult. And I know somebody wrote in the comments about that we should have the same values, but unfortunately, a lot of the people that are not supportive of a more diverse country view the right way as the Christian way. And just because I look like someone doesn't mean I believe the same way as someone. And we need to look at all of those different aspects of people, because we don't know what someone is thinking or feeling based on what they look like. And I think, and now that doesn't, I think the best comment my mom once said, I get to walk outside with my white face, but there's still issues that our community deals with as well. But we also have privilege, and we know that.
Yeah, and that's key to really understanding that privilege. And privilege is not a bad thing. I think sometimes people take it as a bad rap and they have this white guilt. There is nothing wrong with privilege. We all want that. We all want a privilege, right? The key is how you use it. And so when we talk about being a better advocate, a better ally, is this use your voice for us. So that because your voice is probably louder than ours. You'll get through to people better than ours. I remember growing up, I was a shy, little, frail kid, growing up in Taylorsville, Utah. And I'll never forget the times where I was mistreated in elementary school because I was usually the only Black kid there. But I had friends around me that would protect me, and they would stand up for me. And, they would say, that's not right. You shouldn't say that, or you shouldn't do that. And I probably should have been in more fights than I have been. I've never been in a fight. My friends have been in fights, and a lot of times they were in fights for me. That's an ally. Now, I'm not saying you have to get in a fight, but you just really just stand up for what's right. Say when you hear the message, when you see something, say something. That's what we're looking for. And when you're talking about police reform, when you're talking about all the systemic issues happening in education and housing and in healthcare, there are so many elements of racial inequities that are happening in the world today that that we can only be a voice for so much. And so it's important that we start continue to find these allies and work together so that we can start making change. But we just need more voices.
Yeah, James, some of that need for increased voicing and voices comes from unity, right, and uniting as Americans. And so for me, a lot of this conversation, and you folks saw some of that in the chats that I was involved in, is what are the ties that bind us together as Americans, right? Not as Black Americans, white Americans, Asian Americans, Muslim Americans, Jewish Americans, but Americans, right? And our backgrounds and our experience, those shape our perceptions. But to me, the things that we're talking about that are at the heart of what our country is going through aren't really perspective type things, right? Like human dignity. I try not to use words like right and wrong, because you can have conversations about that too. What is right, what is wrong, but you use stand up for what's right. And just using that word in another way, right? Like human rights, right? Human rights, human dignity, equality, justice for all equally. Those aren't really things, in my opinion, that we have to kind of parse. Well, what's your view of that? What's my view of that? Those are basic things, right? Like God-given things. It's what we said in our Constitution. We hold these truths to be self-evident. They don't have to be argued. It's not a perspective. All people are created equal. And part of our challenge, I believe, is just all of us kind of accepting and coming together under that, because then we can start to talk about how our system can be changed to hopefully provide that to all Americans.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate you sharing that, Reggie. You know, it's sad that human rights has to be a political issue, because just like you mentioned,
Right.
it is written in the Constitution. We have it in all of our amendments, but for some reason, we're constantly in this battle in order to bring equality, equity to life when it's already written. You know, the system is perfect until people are involved. And unfortunately, we have a lot of people with their own agendas that are making it challenging to defend and uphold people's constitutional right to have the same rights as everybody else, to make their voices heard in order to people to create awareness that things are wrong right now. You know, someone posted in the chat, is like, what groups are strong, what strong unifying leaders? And honestly, that's hard right now, because everybody's just really trying to share their voice. And so, but like I mentioned, everything rises and falls on leadership. And so whether you like it or not, we are influenced by our leadership right now. And so we are being guided, you know, where one is pushing one way, we're trying to push back. No, hear us, hear us, hear us. And that's one of the things that I try to create a different culture within the Black Chamber, is that we work to be welcoming. We work to be inclusive. We work to strive to create the bridges and create some understanding. And, you know, when you have no paid staff, you really have no option but to start creating the strategic partnerships and communities and the membership that you rely heavily on to engage and bring that impact. And so in order to do that, we do have to come together, united as one unit. So, you know, just being biased on that, unifying leaders is, you know, I think what we've created within the Black Chamber is a perfect example. You know, we have more non-Black chamber members than we have Black chamber members right now. And that happened because from June 1st till now, we had an influx of membership that really flipped the demographics of our membership base, because we have so many people wanting to support, wanting to help us. And guess what? We welcome them in with open arms. We create the dialogue. It's like, what are you able to provide? Here's the resource and platform we have. We kind of find, once again, that common ground to start creating the solutions for our community.
James, do I still have time for a question?
Sure.
One of the things we're focusing on in our company is the diversity, equality, inclusion effort. And I really appreciated your thoughts on listening to understand and not to respond. What strategies have you seen work within large corporations to get that listening, especially for senior leaders, understanding for our underrepresented groups?
Yeah, great question. A lot of companies that I've talked with have created listening sessions. I know my company started listening sessions where we can ask questions beforehand, and you know, so they can prepare to address those questions. And really, all those listening sessions is what it's titled. They listen, and it's to allow the employees just to kind of share their thoughts and their experience of what it's like being an employee in that workplace with someone that identifies like them. Even Governor Herbert did a listening session with the Black community leaders. You saw that happening around mid-June. They did a following one about a couple of weeks ago. So those have been really effective. And I can say for certain, at least from where the governor's listening sessions, that there was some action steps so when he came back in July, he brought some solutions, like, we were going to, you know, gauge money for this. Here's what we are looking for based upon the surveys and based upon your discussions. Here are some priorities we want to focus on. You know, what do you feel is right? You know, what direction should we go? So I appreciated that. So where that goes, it still remains to be seen as we work to resolve it. But so far, you know, I feel good about the progress itself. I'd rather any type of action happen than none at all. And other companies have been, you know, mainly behind the scenes trying to find solutions. There was another company that was really just trying to work to find solutions, or scrambling, right, trying to figure out something. Meanwhile, there was a Black employee that was very boisterous that finally had to speak up, reached out to leadership. What are you guys doing? You hear about everything going on and none of you guys are saying anything. Meanwhile, you know, this leadership that's all white thinking, yes, we know, we just don't know what to say. So we're trying to figure it out right now. So one thing which is key is communicate. Regardless whether you have a statement, regardless if you have some action or not, the key is letting your team know we are listening, we are learning, we are trying to understand. Here's where we're at now. We're just gaining some perspective, and we have something coming, right? And we'll keep you updated. If anything, like I said, the biggest leadership, the most important leadership quality is communication. You know, for those of us that are married, we know how important communication is. We know how important listening is, right? Is you know, so, and then we also know how important it is to listen just to understand, right? So those have been most effective. Just those kind of listening sessions have been, what I've learned has been pretty impactful.
Thank you for that insight.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll open up for about a couple more minutes. I have a little bit more time here, so definitely want to answer as many questions as I have before we wrap up here. So time for about a couple more questions if there are any. All right, quiet group. I'm not even looking at the Facebooks. I'm pretty sure there's questions there that are happening, going on right now. And I
Hey,
don't.
James. Sorry
Hey.
to interrupt you. This is Reggie. I have a question because, like, I've really enjoyed these dialogues and these forums, and I really appreciate you leading these and setting these up and coordinating them. My challenge for myself is, you know, how do we take this to the next level, and how do we keep this conversation going with leaders who are empowered to actually help make changes, right? So that the momentum doesn't die, and you know, talking and listening doesn't bring the fruit that we're trying to produce at this great time of need in our country.
Yeah, you actually brought up my closing statement. So that's perfect. You know, it's like, what are the next steps, right? And the next step really is to be uncomfortable, right? Growth happens outside of your comfort zone. And if you really want to be an ally, if you really want to be an advocate, if you really want to be a voice for change, it's time to raise your platform a little bit, raise your voice a little bit, and talk and make an effort to talk to the leaders. Because guess what? The leaders are listening right now in corporate, in government, in community. They're all listening. And so let's take the time. This is a perfect opportunity for people to listen. So let's focus, it's use that time, and as nervous or as uncomfortable as it may be, you know, just kind of step into the fear and just kind of do it anyway. Kind of like my friends, right, that were helping me when I was being mistreated. They just kind of stepped in. They didn't really know at the time what they tried to do. All they knew was that their friend was in trouble. And so that's the perspective you have to go with. My community, my friends are in trouble, and we need to do something. And if there's more voices being brought to city councils, more voices being brought to mayors and government, then things start changing. And that's what the protests are about, to raise that awareness. But for those that don't like the protest, I don't like the protest. It's not something I tried one time to go to a protest, and that lasted as long as I could. And once we started marching and all that, I was like, all right, emotionally and physically exhausted. Maybe I'm too old for it. I don't know. That's why these young people lead it. But I feel my voice is more powerful. So I guess that's kind of where we're close. I know a lot of people are over here jumping off and need to go to the next appointment, but I appreciate you bringing that, bringing us to close here, Reggie. Is that the next step now is to lean in a little bit, be just a little bit more uncomfortable, because it's where we're uncomfortable is what's going to bring change. It's what's going to bring the opportunities. It's how we're going to find solutions. So I just encourage everybody that's on the Zoom, that's on the Facebook, that'll listen to this later. It's time to make your voice heard. And if leadership is not willing to change, then it's time to change leadership. So thank you guys so much for joining in today. We're going to wrap this up, and this is recorded and it's up on Facebook for those who are on Facebook. It's easy to find me, and I appreciate you chiming in today.